The next problem that we're going to take a look at is the difference between passive and active sentences and when to use a passive sentence in English. Let's start with some definitions. An active sentence. The example, John wrote the book. In an active sentence, the subject, John, is the agent or performer of the action expressed in the verb. So it is John who is writing the book. He's performing that action. In the passive sentence, the book was written by John. The subject, the book, is what the action expressed by the verb is performed or carried out on. And it's called passive because the etymology, it comes from Latin patior, which means to suffer something, right, or to receive something in return. So essentially the book here is suffering the action performed by John. Now the advantage in a passive sentence is that you can easily omit the agent. Right? So for example, we can say the book was written, right? We can easily omit the by John. Now, when do we use passive sentences? Well, we prefer passives when the agent is, one, not known, so my car was stolen. Who stole the car? I don't know, but my car was stolen, so the agent isn't known. We also use passives when the agent is people in general. So an order form can be found on page 2. So let's say I'm reading a magazine and I want to order let's say some wine, or I want to order some clothes or something like that, some kind of catalog, and I write an order form can be found on page 2. So essentially people in general, all of you people who are reading this magazine can find the order form on page 2. So instead of saying that, we use a passive. We also use a passive when the agent is unimportant, right? He is thought to be somewhere in Russia. Well, what's the focus on? Well, he is somewhere in Russia, and people think that he's somewhere in Russia, or he's thought to be somewhere in Russia. Is he in Russia? Is he not in Russia? We don't know. Right? But it expresses this idea of an uncertainty. Right? He is thought to be somewhere in Russia. Right? It's this idea that the agent is unimportant here. Or when the agent is obvious. Right? She's being treated for pneumonia. Well, who is treating her for pneumonia? Well, it's obvious that doctors treat her for pneumonia. Right? So the agent is obvious. So in those 4 cases, we prefer a passive. Let's take a look now at the people in general reason. Now, we often use active sentences with subjects like people, somebody or someone, something, they, we, you. So in spoken English, we'll use these kinds of sentences. However, in formal English or in academic contexts, we avoid these subjects by using the passive. So if we want to say, somebody will give you the questions a week before the exam. So let's say me, I'm standing in front of my class and I'm saying, listen guys, somebody, right, one of us teachers, right, or maybe the Prüfungsamt or something like that, somebody will give you the questions a week before the exam. However, if I want to write that on a piece of paper, I obviously want to avoid this idea of somebody, and I want to avoid the you. So how do I do that? I use a passive. Students will be given the questions a week before the exam. They're installing a new computer system next month. Who's they? Well, maybe the people at the university, or maybe the university hired some kind of a contractor to come in to install the computer system. Who knows, right? The most important thing, however, is that a new computer system is being installed at the university. So we use a passive. The new computer system is being installed next month. So we can leave out those kinds of subjects, right, by forming a sentence in the passive. Now, passives with verbs of saying and reporting. We use these in certain contexts. People in the area have been told to stay inside. Why did you do it that way? Who told you that? The answer, that's what I was told. So in that sentence, or in these 2 example sentences, we use tell in the passive if it's number 1 in the first sentence as if it's an order. So people in the area were told to stay inside. They were ordered to stay inside, maybe by the police or by the government or something like that. Why did you do it this way? Who told you that? That's what I was told. That's what I was ordered to do, right? Somebody gave me that order. I was ordered to do it that way, right? And I can also avoid mentioning the agent, right? It's also a bit of an advantage. Maybe if I made a mistake, right, and I don't want to get somebody into trouble, I don't want to throw somebody on the bus, I can say, that's what I was told to do, right? They told me to do it, I was told to do it that way. Let's take a look at the second batch of sentences. The New York Times reported that the damage was extensive. That's obviously an active sentence. The New York Times reported something. The passive sentences, the damage was reported to be extensive according to the New York Times, or it was reported that the damage was extensive. Obviously, in the second sentence, the damage was reported to be extensive according to the New York Times. All right, I have a passive with an according to, mentions the source. However, I can eliminate the source. Let's say if the source isn't really important, right? The focus is not necessarily on the source, but the focus is maybe on the fact of the damage itself. So the damage was extensive is what's important. The source or the agent who's doing the reporting is not that important. Or maybe the agent isn't known. I can say it was reported that the damage was extensive. I don't know who reported it. I just heard it. It's a kind of a rumor. Let's take a look at the third batch of sentences. It has been acknowledged that a lack of concentration caused the problem, or a lack of concentration has been acknowledged to be the cause of the problem. So we have a passive structure there with acknowledge. And we use that passive structure if the agent either isn't important or if it's people in general, right? People acknowledge, or everybody acknowledges, that a lack of concentration causes the problem. So we can omit that subject, right? We can use a passive construction there. So when do we not use the passive? And this is a typical mistake that many German students make. It's the overuse of the passive. So these kinds of structures, it must be said that, it is said in the article that, it is reported in the article that, it must be noted that, it must be considered that. There is no reason to use these constructions, so please do not use them in your essays, right? Do not even use the active versions of these constructions. One must consider that, one can say that, one must note that. There's no reason for these kinds of constructions to be used. Right? When we take a look at why we use the passives, those four reasons, they do not in any way, shape, or form have any influence or have any role here. So please do not use these constructions. Thank you.